Awakening, an online town hall discussion and Q&A with Crazywise film panelists. My name is Dabney Alex, and I'll be moderating today. I'm the founder of Shades of Awakening, an online interview series and hub that really looks at how we frame these experiences of spiritual crisis or mental health crisis, and how we integrate and heal from them. Many years ago, I experienced my own spiritual crisis in which I was hospitalized, I was medicated. The messages I was receiving at the time were that, there was something wrong with my brain, that I was never going to get well. And, that framework was even more traumatizing than the experience itself. And so this is just one of the many reasons why I'm really passionate about this conversation, this topic, and really so happy to welcome you all today. There's just many people who have joined from all over the world. Over 4,000 people registered for the event, and from England, Spain, Germany, Ireland, Italy. And so it's just a really huge testament to how much this movement is growing and gaining steam, and how ready people are to reframe that which we call mental illness. So just to give you an overview of what the next hour is going to look like, I'm going to move right into introducing our panelists. Then we're going to watch a short trailer of the film. Hopefully you had a chance already to watch the full-length film. If not, it will be available until March 28th on the same link that you received when you registered for this event. And we're then going to move into a discussion with the panelists and Q&A. We'll be taking questions from the audience. You can submit your questions using the Q&A button, which is in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. And we'll be looking at what is the current narrative or paradigm in mental health right now, and what are the problems that are presented by it. What do we want a new narrative or paradigm to look like, to explain? What do we want it to say? And how do we begin to change the paradigm? What can we do, and how do we begin to come together as a global community and make the necessary changes? So the intention really for today's event is to be able to come together to get this conversation going. And the belief, and really a large premise of the Crazywise film itself, was to bring people together to really spark a deeper discussion and bring this discussion into a wider audience so that we can shift this paradigm and shift the conversation around mental health. So later I'll be sharing an opportunity for those of you who have joined us live today. And so you'll want to stay till the very end. And I'll also be sharing some special announcements about things that are happening around the Crazywise launch that's happening this spring, and the revealing of the film. So I want to start and just offer a really warm appreciation to our sponsors who helped make this event happen. Assist, American Center for the Integration of Spiritually Transformative Experiences, Integrative Mental Health for You, Foundation for Excellence in Mental Health Care, The Curious Spirit, Beyond Meds, Spiritual Crisis Center, ASHA International, Mental Health Worldwide, Free Mind Project, Support for Extraordinary Experiences, Charter for Compassion, Onward Mental Health, and Portland Hearing Voices. All of these organizations and projects supported us by helping us spread the word and really allowing this event to be attended and experienced by as many people as possible. So we're really, truly grateful to them for their support. And you can check out more about what they do, search them, look them up online. There's some really great organizations doing really wonderful work. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce and welcome our panelists. Robert Whitaker, Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist and author. His most recent book, Anatomy of an Epidemic, challenges the chemical imbalance theory of mental illness and takes a critical look at the effectiveness of our pharmaceutical approach that currently dominates our mental health care system. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bob.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
Wonderful. Gabor Mate, he's a doctor and an author. Dr. Mate is a physician who specializes in neurology, psychiatry, and psychology, as well as the study and treatment of addiction. He's a renowned lecturer and best-selling author. Dr. Mate believes that mental distress and pathology are largely a result of a materialist culture that idealizes individualism and ignores our emotional needs. Thank you, Gabor, so much for being with us today.
You're welcome, although I want to say that trauma is a big part of it as well. So it's actually childhood trauma that is at the basis of mental health disorders, in my opinion. I'll say more later.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to diving into that and going more deeply into how that affects these experiences that people are having. Akaya Esima, survivor and mental health counselor. Akaya's story is highlighted in the film, which many of you got to see. After suicidal depression, her first ray of hope for recovery came when she found the peer-led mental health organization Baltic Street in New York. And the second profound moment in her healing came when a South African healer known as a Sangoma redefined her mental illness and began her initiation and training in an age-old shamanic tradition. Nice to see you, Akaya. Thanks so much for being here.
Greetings, Dabney. I feel very blessed and I'm very, very excited to be here.
Awesome. And Phil Borges, Crazywise director and producer. Phil's been documenting Indigenous cultures and the human rights issues they face for over 25 years. His award-winning books and exhibitions are known worldwide, and he's produced several films in collaboration with organizations like Amnesty International, UN and Women Care. Phil's given several TED Talks and hosted television documentaries for Discovery and National Geographic. Hi, Phil.
Hi, Dabney. Thank you for hosting this. And hi, everybody. It's so good to have everybody joining this conversation.
And I also want to welcome Will Hall, therapist and mental health advocate. Will's an articulate bright light in the survivor-led movement, advocating for a change in the way mental illness is defined and treated. As a leader in the movement, Will lectures and gives workshops worldwide. He's faced his own struggles with madness and speaks to us about the alternative treatment approaches that have worked for him. Hi, Will.
Thank you so much, Dabney. It's great to be here, and hi, everybody.
Hi. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to transition into viewing this 3-minute trailer of the film. And afterwards, we'll go right into the discussion portion of the town hall meeting.
I experience screaming voices. People don't believe how insane I am.
And it was terrifying. Totally manic or totally depressed. And it was, it wasn't him. The Adam we knew.
I just wanted a car to hit me or a truck or just something to take me out because this time I wanted it to really work.
I really felt like I needed to end my life. I felt like I was this complete failure. So I was in really bad shape, and the mental health system only made that worse.
It's a mythology to think that there's the normal and then there's the abnormal.
The average recovery rate in the Western world, with all our sophisticated diagnoses and medications and highly paid experts, is about 1/3. The recovery rate in the developing world is about 2/3.
Where does somebody who's in this delicate state, they're in a process. They're sent to prison, they're sent to jail, they're sent to a psychiatric ward, or they're chemically incarcerated, or they're homeless.
In the United States, we've come to believe in the chemical imbalance theory of mental disorder.
These medicines are very, very powerful in helping, but they can be very powerful in harming.
I mean, like the disclaimer on these pills, that's typically the first side effect is suicidal thoughts. And that's what the doctor is giving you to feel better. I mean, it's crazy.
We live in a psychotic society. We do. And what is meant by psychotic? Out of touch with reality.
How mental illness is constructed in different places in the world is very, very different.
Only in the Western world have we developed this bizarre idea that hearing voices and having strange ideas has no meaning at all.
My human rights work has taken me to indigenous and tribal cultures around the world. Often I met individuals who would go into a trance-like state to serve as a healer or visionary for their community. These are the people we call shaman. And I was surprised to learn that many were identified in their youth by having what we would call a psychotic break. Hearing voices, having visions, feeling terrified. I was struck by how differently these symptoms were looked at in our culture.
We have lost touch in our medical system from some of the simple needs that people have for connection, the simple needs that people have for community. Maybe it's not just a broken brain. Maybe it's not just an illness. Maybe this is not just something to hide and be ashamed of. Maybe it's something to explore and learn from.
All right, everyone. So as we move into the discussion, once again, you can submit your questions in the top left of your screen. And I just want to remind our panelists to start their videos again. So one of the things that the movie starts out with is the quote that the wound is the place where the light enters you. And I think in my case, that definitely felt true. And I also just want to mention that it's really important that we don't romanticize these experiences, and that we really honor the fact that they often can be very challenging and even dangerous. And the other piece that I want to speak to is just that really, you know, we're not anti-medication, and that there really is a place for medication and treatment. And yet, over the past 30 years, the broken brain and chemical imbalance theory has had mixed results at best. So today we're going to start off the discussion with a question for Bob. And the question is really, you know, what is the current narrative or paradigm, and what are the problems with it?
Well, the current paradigm we have really goes back to 1980, when the American Psychiatric Association published the third edition of its Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And at that time, they said, we're going to conceive of these problems, psychiatric problems, as brain illnesses. And they also said, we're going to create as big a net as we can in terms of who we describe having these illnesses. And then they began telling us a story that science was supporting that conception they had. They told us that they were finding that psychosis is due to too much dopamine and depression due to too little serotonin, and that we now had drugs that fixed it. And that's a story of a great medical advance. It means you've identified the pathology and now you have an antidote to it. The problem is it just wasn't true. The biology of mental disorders remained unknown. The drugs don't fix any known biology. And so what happened is we organized ourselves around a false narrative that was pitched to us as science, but isn't in fact a scientific narrative. And you never get good care when you're organizing your societal care around a false story. And that's really what has happened. And as part of this creating a narrative, they even said someone who doesn't agree with it is like a flat earther. So they tried to delegitimize criticism of it. And that's really where we are. That paradigm in many, many ways has collapsed. The chemical imbalance theory has collapsed. And that sort of opens up what this movie is trying to do and this discussion is trying to do is, well, what sort of paradigm should we have? What sort of thinking should we have as a society? And I think that's what the discussion today is about.
Yeah. Thanks so much for just kind of giving us that really clear look at how we got here and what is actually happening with the current beliefs around the mental health treatment and how we view these illnesses. And I find even in my day-to-day, when I share with people a little bit about, you know, some of this work that I do, and that we're all here, kind of this alternative perspective and view, it's amazing to me how just completely, people just don't even question the chemical imbalance theory. It's just thought to be a complete truth.
Yeah, well, when it's pitched as science and you have people with great authority saying it's true, the American Psychiatric Association, professors at academic medical schools, why would you question it? But ironically, it's completely fallen apart. And so that, as I said, I think opens up a new possibility now.
Right. So we know, I think probably many of the people that are here with us today really understand, whether it's from a personal level or professional level, what's not working in the paradigm, in the current mental health paradigm. I think the more difficult questions and what we're, want to dive into is really, what do we want the new narrative to explain? What do we want it to look like? And I'd like to start and open up this question to Akaya, from your perspective and from the experience that you've been through and this huge transformation. What do you see as a different way of framing these experiences?
Sure, thank you. Having my my mentor, my teacher, Yeye Gogo Nana, and my peers to help me look beyond my diagnosis was a huge aspect of my spiritual evolution, and expanding the narrow position that was given to me during the process of receiving treatment from the mental health system. And so those auditory hallucinations, those labels, visual hallucinations really became gifts to me through my own cultural process, through my own spiritual process. And with culture, I think it's important to implement culture and recognize that as an importance in the mental health field, in treatment with providers, and also really honoring the recovery process and allowing people to explore their own recovery in the way that they actually have a voice in their recovery process.
Mm-hmm.
And spirituality, it was big and very, very much important for me. So I feel like we should be able to honor people's spiritual ideas as long as they're healthy, honoring that process, honoring people's spiritual journey, and opening up a way for them to be comfortable to speak about those things, or having groups. I really feel that it's important to change the paradigm in the mental health system with hiring more peers. I feel like peers should be in every aspect of a person's recovery process, whether it's in the hospital, whether it's in clinics, whether it's in a recovery center. Peers, people with lived experience should have be a part of that journey for the person in recovery. I think we need to hire more peers and have them in every aspect.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it sounds like for you, a really big beneficial part of your recovery and healing process was just being given a different framework to find meaning in your experiences, and that the common language that's used, in the the mental health world to describe these sets of experiences is seen as a negative symptom, a pathology, and for you being able to use a different language and connect to a different context and culture allowed you to see your experiences as gifts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for it, and I feel like everybody should have that opportunity if it fits them. Absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think for myself, the most painful part of my experience with the mental health system was being told what I was experiencing. Being told, you're having a first episode psychosis. You're having and having that placed on me, when inside I was feeling, actually, I feel like I'm in this really valuable transformational process, but it was being diminished in a sense. So, so I think that's really hugely important. I'm so glad that you brought that up, as well as, everyone should have the ability to connect with peers and the healing that can happen from that as well.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks for sharing that. And Gabor, you brought up trauma, so I'm curious to hear your 2 cents on how we want to reframe this new narrative, and what does making space for looking at how trauma influences or impacts these experiences have to do with how we can shift this paradigm.
Well, first of all, I think we have to have a broad view that accounts for all kinds of experiences. What we call crazy in our society actually covers a whole range of mental, emotional experiences and behaviors. So I'll grant you that sometimes what we call psychosis may be the first episode of a spiritual awakening. And in our culture and in our medical system, we have no way of recognizing that or dealing with it, as you have both said. So that's one possibility. However, I'm also not ready to dismiss the brain disease model, only because I know from my own experience and as a physician, but also as an individual, that you change somebody's brain chemistry and they can actually sometimes derive great benefit. I mean, the first time I took an antidepressant, it didn't take 3 weeks or 6 weeks. I was a different person in 2 days because of the chemical change in my brain. I don't know precisely what the change was, but I could sure tell the difference. And I've seen that with other clients as well, many, many times. Now, the reality is that the human brain is shaped by the environment. And so the problem with psychiatry today is that, as Bob Whitaker very eloquently has demonstrated, we reduce mental health problems to this idea that what's wrong here is the chemistry of the brain. But actually, if you actually look at the science of it, the brain is programmed by life experiences, particularly in early childhood. And the more trauma people experience, the more pain they will have, the more difficulty they'll have to regulate their emotions. And trauma can also interfere with healthy brain development. So, according to many, many studies, and certainly in my experience, when I look at mental health conditions from depression to anxiety to psychosis to addictions, there's always trauma involved early in childhood. And the profession, unfortunately, doesn't deal with trauma, doesn't talk about it. Medical students don't hear about it in their education. And so that we're left with this very narrow perspective that all we have to do is change people's brain chemistry. So what I'd like to see is a much broader conversation that doesn't rule out sometimes the use of medications when they're called for, but only very much with a patient-centered focus. So we don't impose it on people. We ask people, how did that make you feel? And is it helping you or is it not helping you? And really listen to them, and, as opposed to the imposed medical coercion model. But also to include an exploration of people's life histories, their childhoods, their relationships, how they feel about themselves, their relationship to spirituality, and so that we need to have a broad view that incorporates all these facets.
Yeah, I can really appreciate what you're sharing, and it sounds like, from what I'm hearing, just really taking a more, not a black or white approach to, just the physical element, the brain disease model, and also not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but looking at, there's all these different complex factors and elements that could be contributing to a person's experience, and, being able to really look at those different layers of their history, their potential trauma that's happened, their current environment, stressors, all these different things that could be contributing, and creating more space. Like you said, in our culture, we don't really have a context for, what does a spiritual experience look like that could be so extreme that it looks like psychosis, but perhaps is not indicative of a brain pattern, So, yeah, I appreciate that view that if, maybe it's not so simple, and we need to really expand our capacity to look at the complexity of these issues.
And unfortunately, as people have said, as Bob points out, 90% of the time, or 95% of the time, somebody's diagnosed with what is considered to be a mental health condition, whether it's depression, anxiety, or psychosis. All that happens is that they're given a medication, and none of these other facets are even thought about, let alone explored. And physicians have actually no template, there's no receptor in their brains, there's no context in which they could even begin to ask these other questions, given the narrowness of their training. And I know that because I went through medical training myself.
Right, right. Well, I think many of our listeners probably have had that direct experience, if not for themselves or with their family. I'd love to get your 2 cents, Will, on the question of sort of what do we want this new narrative or paradigm to contain, to explain, to look like. What are the elements, that we see missing that we potentially want to shift toward? I think.
Let's see. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Yeah. Thank you. And I have to say, it's really interesting and strange to be on the Zoom webcast. I feel like I'm a little bit in an altered state, just being part of this whole conversation. But it's a good altered state, and I think that's that's most important, is to really recognize that what we've done is we've really pathologized and turned difference into a problem. We've lost track of the diversity of human experience. We've stopped listening to people and we started listening to just what textbooks are telling us. And they're normalizing. They say one way of thinking, one way of viewing the world is really the only way. And this is really a kind of psychiatric colonialism. It ignores the rich, rich history of wounded healers, the rich, rich history of shamanism, the rich, rich history of people going through adversity, going through psychosis, going through emotional, psychological crisis, and then coming out of it with strengths and with gifts and with talents and with something to offer the community. So I think that's really one of the key pieces that's missing here, is listening to people. And I think the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, putting people into categories, is kind of essentially a way of not listening to people, a sophisticated way of not listening, a powerful way of not listening. But we really need to challenge that. And what we need to do is to validate these different realities and recognize that not everybody is going to have a spiritual view, but that is one possibility. Many people will really benefit from understanding their own trauma experiences, and many people will really benefit from connecting with a collective peer support framework. And not everybody is benefiting from medications. The research is very clear that medications are harming a lot of people. They're very exaggerated in their effectiveness, and they're based on a lot of faulty and invalid science. So that's one of the things that I've been doing in my work with the peer movement and now as a therapist, is really bringing in a harm reduction approach to medication, really meeting people where they're at, helping people to come off medication if that's what's useful to them, to validate and support them using medications, but using them in a wise way. We need to recognize that these are powerful psychoactive substances. Yes, they can have some kind of benefits in some contexts for certain situations, but at the same time, they come with great risks and with great harm. And so this, I think, is really the good news, that there are a lot of pathways forward out there if we take our view away from this kind of narrow psychiatric framework that has come to dominate. If we start looking around the world from the experiences of other cultures, if we look within our own cultures, we live in multicultural societies, we look within the different traditions that are within our own cultures, and we also recognize innovative approaches like the Soteria House model, the open dialogue approach that's been developed, the Hearing Voices movement. So I think this is a really creative possibility moment that we're in right now, where a certain paradigm is starting to weaken and break down. There's a lot of questioning. I don't think we need to come up with the answer, but we need to have these kinds of conversations and have more questions, where in the past there's just been one monolithic answer that's been given to people. And so I'm really excited about the possibilities of moving in new directions, including embracing the possibility that these experiences are spiritual emergence experiences.
I appreciate so much what you're sharing, Will. And I feel like it was sort of echoed in some ways by Akaya and also from Gabor, this idea that, it's not a either or, and it's, when we think about reframing these experiences or creating a new framework, what I've heard from each of you is the importance of that each person, individual's experience and their path to recovery is so unique. And so, one of the things that I've experienced just in this movement is that there's a certain tension that exists between those who were harmed by the labels and the medication and would like to move away from that, and those who say, well, wait a minute, that really helped me and that was part of my healing process. So it is so important that when we go into this discussion, we not just looking at how do we frame it, let's stick a new conceptual framework on it, but we create a framework that is spacious enough for each individual to find their own meaning and their own path to recovery and healing, that yes, if medication is helping you, then that's great. And if it's not helping you, then that's okay too. And that, how could any of these experiences be put into a box when they are so incredibly individual?
Yeah, listening to diversity is really the key. What we've done is we've kind of created a monocropping or a monoculture of the mind with our psychiatric framework. And I take a much more ecological view, whereas we have to really respect that in nature, there's tremendous diversity. No two human beings are identical. No two human minds are the same. And when we start to listen to that, I think that's when we start to really respect the natural process of healing, because all of us have that capacity for natural healing. It may look very different with different people. We need to start respecting that diversity.
Yeah. Thanks for making that point. So important. It sounds like a lot of what is being shared here is really, moving away from this very oversimplified view of, there's a disease happening, to really understanding there's a greater process happening. Maybe that's informed by trauma, and that recovery is very possible with the proper support. And that may include peer support, that may include medication, that may not include medication, that may include yoga. It may include many different things, but that, there's a capacity for healing that comes from within. And that really means shifting the onus or the authority of the healing process from, these, quote, professionals external to the individuals having this experience, and really giving them, back the power to understand that their healing process is going to come from within themselves. So it's a huge, huge shift. And, I think the next step in the conversation where I'd like to take things as we lead into our Q&A from the audience is, how do we practically go about changing this narrative or changing the paradigm? And I'd love to hear from you, Phil.
Yeah, well, for me, it happened with talking to people like yourself, people with lived experience like Will and Akaya. And it really started in a different culture, in indigenous cultures, where I got to speak with the people we call shaman, and heard that they had their story framed in such a different way. And so many as we've said, so many in our culture are told, this is a disease or a disorder of your brain and there's no cure. And you can imagine how, if you're in that vulnerable state, how frightening, how disempowering. And then you get these labels that are isolating, and you have an expert or an authority figure telling you this. And it's obvious that the person will shrink away in shame and isolation and in fear, and they've had this story imposed upon them. They won't be able to tell their own story. So I think one of the best ways to get this paradigm shift is to make it safe for people with lived experience to come out and tell their stories. And we've just started holding screenings of Crazywise in Europe and started here in the United States. And one of the things that's really encouraging to me, people will come up and say, if I'd seen this at the beginning of my episode, this would have saved me a lot of suffering. And also, I would have been more inclined to tell my story. And so I think it's storytelling. Storytelling has always been at the heart of social change. And I think this isn't going to be any different. This is going to have to come from the ground up. And as more and more people come forward, I think that's where the change is going to happen. And I'm really encouraged, because now we've been blogging about this since we started the movie 5 years ago. And we get 2 or 3 people wanting to share their story, contacting us at least every week. And I'm just hoping that, as the general public and the loved ones around these people actually hear these stories, it'll result in a lot more understanding and a lot less fear that surrounds these episodes that seem so alien to our culture especially.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Storytelling, I think just in the, looking at Adam's story and Akaya's story in the film, I couldn't help myself thinking, wow, what courage and vulnerability to be able to share. And it was so inspiring that to know that the more people who come out and tell their story really paves the way and creates a level of safety for others to share their stories. So the film is really powerful in that way. I want to shift to now we're going to take some questions from the audience. The first question is for Will, and this is from Jane. And her question is, how can I explain to the people in my life who care about me or to others going through their own mental health crisis what the alternative spiritual awakening emergency framework is that I personally identify with?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I mean, I think that people respond when you also are listening to them and listen to what their concerns are, listen to what their hesitations are, make it a mutual dialogue. I think that there is an activist and a social change dimension to this, but we can't just simply, hammer our message across in a monologue kind of way. We have to show that we're not trying to reverse the equation so that we're giving a new diagnosis from the position of we know what's best, but instead that we're opening up a space for diversity and conversation. So I think that anytime if you're trying to help somebody see something new, if you really show that you're listening and interested in what their concerns are, because a lot of these experiences are surrounded by very serious life or death struggles and very serious suffering, and people are terrified. They're absolutely terrified. Terrifying experiences turn us into these stressed out, black and white thinking, narrow points of view, and we have to kind of open up some kind of space to reassure people that we're not just pushing an agenda, but we're actually trying to engage the real foundations of very serious issues that are frightening and address them in direct ways, rather than just glossing over the complexities of this or making it seem like this is just a simple equation, because it's not, and it's going to take time, I think, and I think listening is the key to that.
Mm-hmm. The next question is for Akaya, and this is from Aphrodite. And the question is, how do you find a mental health professional who will wean you off of traditional meds? How do you go about that?
Thank you. Actually, in my case, I went off cold turkey, which I don't recommend for anyone. It was a very hard process. So I do recommend seeing a medical provider that can help wean you off of the medications properly. And I really think it's about doing a little bit of research and asking around, even calling a local peer-run organization or an organization that has peers, because they have lots of access to mental health providers that are open to that kind of work. And if you're with a mental health provider who's not open to helping you taper off of medications, I suggest going and doing a little bit more research and finding someone in your area that does. And the peer mental health facilities are a great place to start.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The next question is for Phil, and this is from David in Lisbon. I've also hid my psychosis experiences from meditation groups and actively pursued a spiritual path. I now feel that meditation in general exacerbates my symptoms. It produces euphoric highs and horrific lows. I thought the film showed this, but it wasn't explicitly mentioned. Is this a conclusion to infer?
Well, I know in Adam's case, he had his symptoms reduced quite a bit by doing meditation. But as he got deeper in and deeper into it, issues of childhood trauma issues started coming up, and it became a situation where it was overwhelming to him. And unfortunately, the meditation center wasn't able to handle it, and they asked him to leave because of his mental health history. And that's a problem. But I think, and I'm only guessing, that as these more powerful issues of past traumas or whatever's coming up, they are hard to deal with and be with, but it seems like that is the answer. I remember Akaya saying, especially in her initiation, what she had to do is be with those feelings before she could release them and let them go. So I would think mindfulness practice, so many people say there's so many benefits from it. If those tough or difficult feelings are coming up, having support or having guidance on how to be with them, I think that's an important part of it.
Yeah, I would
I'd
agree.
like to just chime in if I can on that question.
Yes, please.
You know, during my process, I had a lot of issues around staying grounded, because I was very much, you know, when you go through initiation and shamanic training, you enter both realms. And lots of time in mental health experiences with some people, they are entering other realms and not really understanding what it is. And so during meditation, that can make you flighty. It can make you ungrounded if you don't have a practice that keeps you grounded to the earth's energy. So I would recommend, again, having a mentor. My teacher was essential, in having our elders close to us was essential in the process of the tools that I needed to stay grounded and in touch with this reality.
Yeah, and I would just quickly echo that, you know, almost all spiritual traditions that have practices that work with the expansion of consciousness or working to expand a person's spiritual connection also have really solid rituals in place to help a person deal with some of the psychic material that might come up. And, you know, my meditation teacher always told me, you know, the length of your meditation, how long you're meditating for, is sort of like how deep you're going out into the ocean. You know, if you think of the psyche as an ocean, he would say, you know, 5 minutes in meditation is like going just a short distance from shore. But if you sit in meditation for 5 hours, you're going to go deep into the depths of the ocean. If you don't have the tools to then deal with what you find out there, you know, that can be very dangerous. And most spiritual traditions will really take very seriously the dangers of expanding your consciousness too quickly or going too deeply into meditative states, especially if you don't have mentorship or you don't have tools. So really, really important topic. So that was a great question. The next question is for Gabor. And the question is from Christy. My daughter is just 9 years old. She's been diagnosed with anxiety and has been suggested to take Prozac. I'm not on board with this as she is so young. She's seeing a therapist once a week, learning coping skills, but she has anxiety attacks typically related to school and food. She bites her hand and says it relaxes her. Would love your general opinion on what you think we can be doing to help our lovely little girl.
Symptoms in a 9-year-old girl, and I'll say this very brusquely because of the shortness of the time available to me. Symptoms in a 9-year-old are actually manifestations of problems in the family and problems in a multi-generational family. So this child is probably one of these very hypersensitive creatures who's picking up on vibes that she doesn't know what to do with. I would have to know much more about your pregnancy with her. What was your state of mind? What were your stresses? Her life and your life, and your mental states in the child's early years. I want to know about what is this issue? Is she at home right now? Are there two parents? What is their relationship to one another? How much support do they have? How stressed are they? In other words, I would not be medicating this child, but I would be taking a look at the whole broad family environment, because I've never seen a case of anxiety or any other mental health diagnosis in a child that age that didn't reflect much broader dynamics. And she's sort of like the canary in the mine. She's the one who is manifesting the symptoms but the symptoms did not originate with her. So that she should see a therapist that she trusts and enjoys, well, that's a good thing. But I think the treatment needs to involve the whole family. That would be my quick response. Beyond that, I'd have to know much more about the particular environment. But I would recommend you consider, well, I won't say that. That's fine. I'll stop there.
Great. The next question is, sorry, this is for Bob Whitaker. I would like to know more about the refutation of the chemical imbalance theory. So it's a bit general, but maybe maybe Bob, you could just go into a little bit about what's currently happening in the research of people who are refuting the chemical imbalance theory, or point this person to some articles or resources.
The interesting thing is that within research circles, it's completely collapsed. And if you actually trace the history of the chemical imbalance theory and the efforts to find out if people with depression had low serotonin, or conversely with people with diagnosed with schizophrenia having too much dopamine, in 1999, the American Psychiatric Association, in its own textbook, even while it was telling the public on its website that depression was due to too little serotonin, said it just wasn't, it didn't turn out. We didn't find that people with depression had low serotonin, and they basically said the theory really wasn't well-founded from the beginning. And then you have in 2005 someone named Kenneth Kendler, who's the co-editor-in-chief of Psychological Medicine. He was a famous investigator into this whole story. He said, we have hunted for big, simple neurochemical explanations for mental disorders, and we have not found them. And my favorite sort of moment came when Ronald Pies, who's the former editor-in-chief of Psychiatric Times in 2011, said, the chemical imbalance theory of mental disorders is a kind of urban myth, never a theory seriously proposed by well-informed psychiatrists. So you literally have in this brief history a story of the science not confirming it. You have all sorts of people familiar with that science saying, we didn't find it, even as the public is being told to believe in it. And that goes to the problem. But the only thing you have now is you have some people doing investigations saying, is there some sort of temporary, in some people with psychosis, some sort of temporary sort of hyperactivity of the dopamine system when an episode of psychosis erupts. But even though people investigating that say this does not mean that there's a lesion in the dopamine system as a cause of schizophrenia. So the irony is, if you trace the science, it's completely collapsed. People are still sort of believing in it. You can still find websites. I think even the American Psychiatric Association website still talks about depression due to a chemical imbalance. But in scientific circles, it's completely fallen apart, and researchers are looking for, even the biological guys are now looking for new biological explanations for what the problem is.
Great question. And here's a follow-up to that question. And this question is for Will from Angela. And she says, I disagree that drugs do nothing. And I work with first episode psychosis, and I've seen meds save lives. Can we afford to generalize?
Well, obviously drugs do something. They're very powerful. The question is, are they treating a disease? I think based on what Bob just said, I mean, everything that we call psychosis, everything can be induced in so-called normal people under conditions of stress. So what these are normal human adaptations to experiences that people have. So yes, different kinds of psychoactive substances are going to have an effect. How the person interprets that effect is going to be very individual, but it's not based on the treatment of a disease anymore, that when someone drinks alcohol and it makes them feel less anxious, that means that they're somehow treating their anxiety disorder with the chemical imbalance corrector of alcohol. It's just that alcohol is a psychoactive substance. So these are psychoactive substances. We have a diversity of response to psychoactive substances, including placebo and expectation. But it's a little bit difficult to respond to your question because you're speaking on behalf of someone else. And I certainly respect that many people have used medications. They feel that has saved their life. And I think that different studies show, even with the Soteria House or with open dialogue, that there are some people that find medications are useful. And I think that's why a harm reduction approach is often one of the keys to really reaching people and respecting that diversity. We talked about coming off medications before, and that's one of the things that came out of the peer support group work that I and other people did for many years was the Harm Reduction Guide to Coming Off of Psychiatric Drugs, which has just been widely received around the world. It's in 14 different translations now. And I think one of the keys that guide has been successful is that it does respect that different people have different experiences. Now, why someone feels that medication has saved their life is where we have to be very careful about telling a false story. If we tell someone that you're taking Haldol and therefore you feel your life has saved because it's controlling your psychosis, if we tell that person that you're treating the disease of psychosis, then we ignore the fact that Haldol is a tranquilizer that will affect anyone that takes it. In fact, the neuroleptic antipsychotics are used in veterinary medicine to tranquilize and calm animals. So these are medications that are very powerful, but they're powerful as psychoactive substances with a diversity of response that's going to be very, very individual, just as we all have individual responses to all kinds of psychoactive substances like recreational drugs or cannabis or whatever it is that we're taking to change our consciousness.
So such good, great questions. And I wish that we could be here for the next 3 hours, because it feels like we've just sort of begun to scratch the surface, and, you know, all of these different issues that arise as we look at kind of how do we begin to shift the paradigm, what's important, what do we need to look at, how do we honor those who are helped by medication, how do we, like Will says, take a harm reduction approach and really understand, you know, using them as potentially just one approach, or, you know, in certain situations where it's really needed, but maybe not as a Band-Aid cure-all. So there's just so much that comes up when we enter into this conversation. And, you know, I think that whether you're a mental health professional or you're a concerned parent, or you consider yourself a psychiatric survivor, a person with lived experience, or any number of those, or, you know, I think we all come to the table here into this discussion agreeing that the paradigm is really in need of real change. And, you know, approaching this question of where do we begin and how do we start, it can feel daunting. But one of the reasons why we've come together today is just to spark this conversation and just to get more of these conversations happening. You know, all movements that really bring about a cultural shift and a paradigm shift really begin with a dedicated grassroots movement. Just like Phil was saying earlier, you know, it's really going to start from the ground up. I mean, it already has been for a long time, but that those who are most affected and most passionate coming together, sitting together and talking about some of these issues, which are not easy to answer, you know, and looking at how do we create new language and meaning, and how do we shift this conversation, you know, and that's just really what we've all come here today to do. I want to share a quote by Margaret Mead, which I've always loved. I felt is such a powerful quote. And she says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And so, you know, as we wind down from this discussion, I really want to invite you to host a community screening in your own town or city and host a discussion just like this. There have been screenings already in Europe, and what Crazywise and the team has noticed is that the strength is really in the questions and in the discussion that follows. And, you know, anyone can do a community screening. All you have to do is be able to operate a DVD player or know somebody who can. There's already screenings that are planned in London and Brazil, in Queensland, Australia, Wales, Iceland, New York, really all over the world. This spring, there's going to be screenings happening so that people can go even deeper into some of these questions. There's been, you know, large groups and organizations that are hosting these screenings, and there's been small groups of 2 or 3 people who are just coming together and showing the film in their living room and inviting a handful of people over. So, you know, you don't really need to have any particular kind of background or education or skill. Really, all you need is just a little bit of passion and dedication and a willingness to invite people into this conversation, and, you know, maybe using some of the inspiration from today to help fuel that. And the community screening kit that Crazywise offers, it really gives you all the support you need to, like practical stuff like booking venues. It gives you a discussion guide, promotional materials for the film, invitation letters to invite people to come. And one of the great things about hosting one of these screenings is that you can even sell tickets and use it as a fundraiser or benefit for your own group or your own organization. You can get the kit and the license, and then you can lobby your school or your library or a local wellness center and engage with them and invite them to host the screening. So there's so many different ways that, we want to encourage you to continue this conversation. I recognize that an hour is such a short period of time, and we got so many questions that came in, and I would love to be able to answer all of them. And I just want to say, like, take the fuel from this conversation and host a Q&A in your own small town. Just imagining what would happen if these conversations were taking place in more than just some of the major cities in the world, if they were really happening globally, and what would happen when we reach a certain threshold of 50, 100, 1,000 and more of these discussions happening. So if you're interested in hosting a community screening, you can go to the Crazywise website, crazywisefilm.com/community-screenings. And I also want to recognize that affordability can be a factor for people. And so, some people have done small fundraisers or come together to share the initial cost of the screening license, like a small GoFundMe campaign, something like that. And that also today, Crazywise has extended a 20% coupon to the first 20 people from today's event who want to sign up to do a screening. So that's a really super generous offer. And just coming from the place of really wanting anyone of you that's listening right now that feels really motivated and inspired to show the film, to bring it to a bigger audience and host a discussion like this, that you're able to do that. So I want to just give a really warm thank you to all of our panelists for taking their precious time to be with us. Thank you for using your voice and your influence to help pave this path. I want to again thank our sponsors who helped to make this event happen. They did so much for sharing the event, and it's just remarkable that people from all over the globe came together, are here listening with us right now. It's really, really powerful, and we couldn't have done it without our sponsors. I also want to thank the Crazywise team. They've been working on this film for I don't know how many years though, just so dedicated, and it's really exciting that it's finally come out and that you've all been able to watch it, and we're hoping to bring it to even more audiences and a wider audience, not just preaching to the choir. But they've worked so hard, and I also want to really thank Akaya and Adam, who wasn't able to be here with us today, just for their vulnerability, for letting us see so deeply into their lives, and for the healing that provides. And thank you to everyone who's here, who's been with us today, for sharing this with your friends, for showing up, for asking questions, for being part of the conversation. And I just want to remind you that there will be an archived recording of this event that's available at crazywisefilm.com. And that will be available. So if there's someone that maybe could have benefited from this conversation, or who wanted to be here but couldn't be here, they're still able to engage and see what happened here today. And also just a reminder that the link to the full-length film will be live until March 28th, so just about another week. And that's available in the initial registration confirmation email that you got when you signed up for this event. So lastly, just stay tuned, because there's so much going on in the next few months with the film coming out, especially this spring with the International Emerging Proud Day that's happening on May 12th in London. This is a day of connection and innovation happening simultaneously in 8 countries around the world. And if you can't be there in person, the video is going to be live streaming from Emerging Proud, and you can check all that out at emergingproud.com/events. Another really great project that's going on that you should be tuning into and checking out. So again, thank you everyone so much for being here. Thank you to our panelists. Will, Bob, Gabor, Akaya, Phil, everyone. It's been wonderful, and hopefully you'll take this as inspiration and look at doing a community screening. Again, it's crazywisefilm.com/community-screenings, and host a similar conversation in your own hometown, and let's spread this message as far and wide as we can.